What happens when reality meets reality? When children are finally introduced to the carefully edited version of their own family's past? Imagine sitting down in front of a screen, only to see your parents, your aunts, your uncles, and even yourself, sometimes as a toddler, sometimes as a baby mortalized in moments you never knew happened. This is the dramatic, emotional, and almost surreal situation that unfolded when Kim Kardashian and Scott Disick decided to have the kids watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians for the very first time. It was more than just a television screening. It was a collision between memory, family history, and celebrity legacy. The setting was deliberately intimate, away from cameras, but the irony was palpable. The very act of watching a show about their family felt like stepping back into the limelight, even in private. Kim Kardashian, poised yet apprehensive, glanced at the remote as though it were a key unlocking a vault of moments not all meant to be relived. Scott Disick, ever the jokester, tried to keep the mood light, cracking a smirk as he prepared for what was sure to be a tidal wave of emotions. The children, innocent yet curious, were about to meet versions of their parents they had never known, preserved in glossy reality television edits, framed for the world before they were old enough to comprehend it. From the very first frame of KUWTK that flickered across the screen, there was a silence that only documentaries can capture. A silence where the weight of awareness presses down on everyone present. Kim Kardashian shifted slightly, her eyes darting between the TV and her kids. Scott Disick leaned forward, his trademark mischievous energy tempered with something more cautious. The kids, wide-eyed, absorbed the opening scenes, an early episode where the Kardashian family dynamic was just beginning to shape itself for millions of viewers. For the children, this was not nostalgia. This was discovery. They had lived their lives surrounded by paparazzi photos, internet memes, and the larger-than-life aura of their last names. Yet, until this moment, Keeping Up with the Kardashians was simply a title something whispered about, referenced by friends, or glimpsed on social media. Now it was a mirror being held up to their own identities, and the reflection was both fascinating and overwhelming. As the first episode unfolded, the laughter and banter between Kim, Kourtney, Khloe, and Kris Jenner filled the room. Kim Kardashian's younger self appeared on screen, still glowing with ambition, unaware of how iconic her name would become. The kids looked at her, then back at their mother, puzzled by the difference between then and now. Kim smiled softly, acknowledging that she was, in many ways, a stranger even to herself back then. Scott Disick couldn't resist making a playful comment about his own younger self, recalling the wild antics that once defined his on-screen persona. But beneath the humor, he too felt the tug of history resurfacing. The atmosphere was layered, part amusement, part discomfort, part awe. The kids giggled at the exaggerated drama, but they also had questions. Why were people fighting? Why did certain conversations feel so intense? Why was the world watching their family in such a raw and personal way? And in those questions lay the core of the experience. The realization that their family had not just lived its life, it had performed it, archived it, and broadcast it for the entire world. Kim Kardashian leaned into the role of guide, pausing the screen at certain moments, offering explanations, softening the edges of conflicts that had once shaken the family but were now history. She chose her words carefully, aware that this was a delicate introduction to fame's double-edged sword. Scott Disick, surprisingly, took on a role of mediator, using his wit to ease the tension whenever the past felt too heavy. His children, who had grown up with his legacy shadowing them, seemed both amused and unsettled to see their father in scenes where immaturity and chaos often took center stage. The longer the kids watched, the more complicated the emotions became. For the adults, this was a reliving of what they once endured. For the children, it was an initiation into a truth they had only sensed, but never fully understood. Documentary style, it felt like time folding in on itself, the past and present coexisting in the glow of a television screen, each character reacting in real time to the ghost of their younger selves. What struck the kids most, however, was the bond amid the arguments, the scandals, the laughter, and the tears. They saw something that transcended the spectacle, a family that, no matter how fractured at times, came back together. Kim Kardashian pointed this out deliberately, highlighting the strength that carried them through years of fame, criticism, and personal struggles. Scott Disick added his own reflections, candidly admitting where he had gone wrong, offering his children a chance to see growth in motion. The screening extended beyond a single episode. It became a journey episode after episode, season after season, with pauses for explanations, for laughter, and even for tears. Certain moments sparked deep conversations. The kids asked about fame, about the paparazzi, about why people seemed so invested in every detail of their family's life. Kim Kardashian answered with the patience of a mother, but also the wisdom of someone who had lived in the public. I long enough to know both its beauty and its cruelty. Scott balanced honesty with humor, reminding his children that behind every dramatic cut and cliffhanger, real people were trying to navigate very real emotions. And yet, perhaps the most powerful moment came not from what was shown on screen, but from the children's own reflections, as they watched Kim Kardashian and Scott Disick grapple with their younger selves. The kids began to articulate their own feelings about being part of this legacy. It wasn't just about seeing old footage. It was about realizing that their own lives had been influenced by a narrative they hadn't written. For Kim, the experience was sobering. Watching her kids watch KUWTK forced her to confront the ripple effect of choices made long ago, choices to let cameras in, to let millions of strangers into her family's living room. Scott, meanwhile, found humor and humility in the process. He cracked jokes at his own expense, but his children could see the sincerity beneath it. They were witnessing their father's growth, not just as a television character, but as a human being who had stumbled, learned, and evolved by the end of the marathon viewing. The room was heavy with reflection, yet surprisingly light with laughter. The kids were no longer just spectators. They had become participants in a story that spanned generations. Kim Kardashian and Scott Disick had opened a window into the past, and in doing so, offered their children a clearer understanding of the present. The documentary-like quality of this moment lingered in the air. The camera of imagination could almost pan across the room. Kim, composed but thoughtful, her hand resting lightly on her child's shoulder. Scott, leaning back with a grin, occasionally shaking his head at his own younger antics. And the kids, wide-eyed but wiser, beginning to understand what it truly means to be part of the Kardashian-Disick legacy. This was not just a viewing party. This was a rite of passage. A confrontation with fame, family, and the unfiltered realities behind the polished images. The kids had watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians for the first time. But, in truth, they had watched something far deeper, the unfolding of identity, the cost of legacy, and the strange beauty of a family that had lived its life on screen and off. And as the credits rolled, Kim Kardashian and Scott Disick exchanged a look, part relief, part pride, part wonder. They had braved the past together, not for the world this time, but for their children. And in that private room, far from the roar of cameras, they had discovered something extraordinary. That even in a life defined by exposure, some moments remain profoundly intimate.